Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. In today's presentation, the subject I'm going to be looking at is what's referred to as a sine wave or sine wave completion. And we'll follow the usual format. We'll look at the theory first on a chalkboard, and then we'll refer to some charts and see the practical application of that theory, and as well take a look at how we can use this particular price structure in our trading in order to anticipate future price movement. So beginning with the theory about the sine wave and the sine wave completion, I suppose the first issue before anything else is what is a sine wave and what does it look like? And so we'll mark that out first. The sine wave itself is quite a simple, straightforward construct that we would see on screen, and it's something which I've been noticing a lot quite recently. It seems to be quite an effective. Technique in terms of. It seems to be quite an effective technique in terms of when it does appear and when you get a good clean one. It's significant, right? It's very, very significant. The sine wave itself is a geometric. It's a geometric pattern, and it represents symmetry in the market, and that symmetry is effectively what we try to take advantage of, right? So I'll just get screen capture software going, which crashed at a most opportune moment, and then hopefully we can get started, right? So it's yep, okay, it's working. All right, so here we go. Here's our chalkboard. What is a sine wave? Sine wave actually is a very simple construct. As far as price movement is concerned, if we're in a downtrend, the price will take this type of course, and in an uptrend, it will this type of course. And what is significant about it is that if you're drawing a mid pivot, or if you're drawing a line through the price, what you will notice is something to the effect of this, right? That you have your mid pivot line, and the price laps under it, and then laps over it, so it kind of has the under and over construct. And if you were looking at the same thing in a bullish move, again you're getting that over and under. Now I've been studying charts and trying to identify the DNA markers for this particular wave structure, just to help identify it, because it does seem that you have good ones and you have bad ones. And I've always said, when you're trading patterns, it's not about it's not so much about the pattern itself. If we understand when that pattern is likely to fail, or if you can differentiate between the good ones and the bad ones, and the clean ones and the messy ones, then that is what gives us effectively an edge, right? So that allows us to make fairly reasonable decisions and say, okay, this is a structure which I want to trade, or to say, you know what, I'd rather not trade this, I'll sit this out because it's not looking quite right. Yeah, so what are those markers? The first marker is the one which I've identified here, right? So when we're looking at a sine wave, what we want to be seeing is an area beneath the line and a filled area, or an empty area rather, above the line. And if you have that type of construct, then the sine wave is quite a clean structure and quite easily identifiable from that perspective. Where you have an instance that you have your mid pivot line, and the price makes its way and the price makes its way under the line, and then comes and makes its way over the line. But say, for example, you're not getting that kind of gap. Okay, it's something else. It's not sine wave. Here you could be looking at first touch, second touch, third touch of a broken trend line. You could be looking at something else completely, but it's not a sine wave. The first identifier that we have for the sine wave is that you have this area below it, and then you have that area above it. So the price arches under the line, and then it arches over the line, and you will have that area. And when we look at the charts, you'll see it's very, very clearly identifiable. As far as price structure is concerned. The second issue that we have is that where do you draw the mid pivot line from? And again, I have some nuances and some identifiers for that. The main identifier is that as the price comes under and it goes over, usually you'll see a little pin back toward the line, a retest of it, and then a break and breakdown, right? So that identifier, I think, is quite important. And again, when we look at the charts, we'll see some of those. So that is the pattern, that is the structure, that is what a sine wave looks like, right? So it's a pattern, it's very much a visual thing, and what's very nice about it is that visually it's quite easily identifiable because of the structure that it has, and because of the symmetry that you will see displayed while that price structure is forming. I do believe that it's possible to identify sine waves in its early stage, but as far as trade-wise is concerned, what you would be looking at is for the wave to complete when that sine wave completes. So the wave would be completing when the price goes and restrikes the mid pivot line, and at that point, if you see that level is holding, depending on how aggressive or conservative you want to be, you're going to be looking for a reversal from that level. And as far as targets are concerned, you're looking in the first instance for the price to push back up, about halfway. That becomes your T1, and T2 is the origin of the wave, right? So if the wave started from there, that is going to be T2. T1 seems to be achieved quite often. T2 is sometimes achieved, sometimes not achieved, right? So it is very much a secondary target, and it becomes a question of judgment and measurement. And as a trader, you need to decide whether support is being established and whether it looks as though you're going to get that push towards T2, right? But otherwise, when you have sine wave completion, like I said, T1 quite easily achieved. T2, it'll be sometimes achieved, sometimes not. So what we have here is a pattern that actually gives us very, very good risk definition, right? So it is very possible to get perfect entries or entries very close to that level and to define risk. So if the price breaks down that level, or I've taken entries on this using 25 pips, 30 pips, because it literally kind of holds to the strike price, right? And that strike price becomes very important. Then if you're measuring that distance up to T1, you usually find, as far as R&R is concerned, and as far as the pips that you're likely to gain are concerned, it's very heavy out there, right? So you could be looking at 100 pips and you had to risk 20. Sometimes you could be looking at 200 pips and you only had to risk 20, 25, right? So as far as R&R is concerned, it seems to be a very, very good play. Like I said, it's something which has been catching my attention a lot recently, so I've spent a little bit of time researching it. I'm not the first person to identify this structure. In fact, I found charts in Edwards and McGee which describe a similar formation, although it doesn't use the same terminology, but it describes a very similar formation on charts going back more than 100 years, right? So it's a price construct, it's a formation, it's a pattern which has withstood the test of time. And for us, it's just a question of being able to isolate the nuances and say, okay, which are the good ones and which are the bad ones. And once we're able to do that, then we're trading with deadly accuracy, because we only want to be trading the best ones, and the ones which are the most easily identifiable, the ones that have the best structures, and consequently those are the ones which will give us the best reward and the most profit, and reward that entrepreneurial spirit that we have as traders. Okay, so that said, like I said, very simple structure, right? This is what it looks like when it's going down. That's what it looks like when it's going up. As far as the nuances in the formation are concerned, when we're drawing that line, we're looking for something in the middle, right? And then we have our target. So we've got our T1 and we've got our T1 and T2. Okay, that's it from a wave structure perspective. Now, all I'm going to do is just kind of do another image of this, which is more reflective of what you're going to see on screen, and then we'll turn towards the charts. And once we turn towards the charts, I think everything will become really clear very, very quickly. All right, so on a chart, and I'm just going to take the example of a bearish wave. What you're going to be looking at is something like this, right? So from a wave structure point of view, this is what you're going to be looking at, right? So the price falls and it appears to flag, and the ones that appear to flag seem to be the best ones, although it doesn't have to. All right, it doesn't have to, but the ones that flag appear to be the best ones, and your mid pivot is drawn somewhere in the middle of that block, right? So if you're looking at it from a time series perspective, somewhere around the middle of that consolidation block, usually just after, right? So it's not usually before the middle, it's just usually just after the middle of that block. That is where the line is drawn through, and that seems to define the sine wave. Because of course, what is kind of critical with this is that you have your line on your screen before the sine wave completes. Otherwise, it's not going to be a heck of a lot of use for you as far as risk definition is concerned. So one of the important things is just to be able to identify the points that you use in order to construct the lines. The first point which you're going to be drawing is going to be from a high. It doesn't have to be from the highest high, and again we're gonna see that on the chart in a while. So this price could have been falling for a while. That point doesn't have to be from the highest high, but the second point, which is going to be used to construct that mid pivot, is usually somewhere in the middle of that consolidation, right? And like I mentioned, it'll be somewhere where you kind of see the break of that line, a pullback, and usually a pin off of it or a little strike off of it. And that gives you the best indication as far as points are concerned. To use. All right, so that's what it is. Sorry, I'm just going to come back. To entry, and I just want to mention a very, very brief point about it. Right, so once you're seeing that sine wave completion, just remember how we play lines. Right, so you mark the line, you mark the point, and then after that you got to be a player. Right, so being a player means that as long as the level holds, your bias is going to remain intact. That's what it means to be a player, and so use that. If you want to know more about being a player, I think we've done plenty of training videos, and the whole idea comes up in a few Q&A sessions. But the point with a sine wave completion is that we have positive expectation for price movement. We have an idea of what's going to happen next. And as well, we have a target as well, right? So we're looking for the price to reach a particular target, and until the price has reached that target, then the formation is not considered to have completed, right? So so that's as far as the theory is concerned on the chalkboard. And so what we'll do now is spend a little while looking at some charts and and see what we can and see what it looks like practically on screen, right? So the first example I've got up for you is USD/JPY, and uh, what I'm going to do is kind of just draw over it and, and show you what's taken place here, right? So we had quite a strong move, right? And the price works its way high. It goes into a little bit of a consolidation, drops down a little, consolidates, and ends up breaking higher. And first off, what you need to identify is that you can see that huge space which is existing as the price arches over, and then there's this huge space which is existing as the price arches under. All right, that's the first issue. The second issue is that at what point would you have been able to identify the sine wave, right? So in order to identify the sine wave, you need to identify the mid pivot and what are the points which are being used in order to construct it. So if we're looking at where we've drawn the line, we've taken the low and we've drawn it through the middle of this consolidation, and you can see over here as the price is breaking through, it arches back and pins a little and drops down and then makes its way higher, right? So these are our two important identifiers that we have for the price movement. The first is that we have the space. We have the space over here, and as well we can see we have the space under the line, and as well what's important is the place where you construct that line from, right? So your second point is going to be here. Your first point here is in this particular instance at the low. Okay, so looking at USD/JPY, we had another instance where the price fell and went into a flagging type of consolidation. And so then the question became, okay, are we getting a sine wave completion here? In my mind, the place at which I've drawn this particular line is not a sine wave, and fairly obviously not a sine wave, right? It's quite obviously not a sine wave, right? So we can see here gapping on the underside, or we see an empty area here on the underside, but we don't see that similar empty area over here. Rather the price has stayed quite close to the line pretty much all the way down, right? So if this were going to be a sine wave, what would it need to look like? I guess if the price were being drawn here, it would make a little bit more sense, right? So if the price were being drawn here, it would make a little bit more sense. So we've got the fall, we've got the consolidation, the price breaks up over, right? There's a little bit more consolidating and has started breaking down, right? So if she makes her way down and she's going and striking that, that then at that point would start looking like a sine wave, and would say, okay, hang up, boys. It looks like we've got sine wave completion going on, right? So we're looking at the strike price to hold, and then we would be looking for a move back up towards the consolidation, and that would make our T1 target, right? So so this is something which you're going to play with, right? And you've got to move. You know, if it doesn't look like a sine wave, if you haven't got that space above it and you haven't got that space under it, it's not a clean sine wave. It's something else, right? So based on the construct that I had before, and based on the earlier line which I showed you, you know, maybe it's something else, right? Maybe it's you know, first strike, second strike, third strike, right? Maybe it's that, right? But you would not identify that as being a sine wave because you haven't got the space under the wave and the space over the wave, right? So those two aspects are very, very critical as far as the kind of geometrical construct that we're looking for is concerned. Okay, just going to turn towards the dollar Swiss, and again, the dollar Swiss makes for quite an interesting example, and it's one of those questions, is it or isn't it, right? Uh, uh, and so here's the line that we've got marked, right? And what you can see is that the price broke over. You've got this area above it, you've got this area under it, but is that a sine wave? I'd think not. What I would have been looking for is that you've got this consolidation here. The price should break under, you should get that little kind of hook, consolidation, and then the price should break higher. And then you'd be looking at something which geometrically has some symmetry, right? And it is that symmetry which is more important than anything else, right? So I would say that this is not a sine wave, it's something else. It doesn't mean that you can't use that line for a given purpose, but you would not be using it. You would not be using it and saying I've got sine wave completion here, or using it in that regard, right? So here's it's an example, but it's not a actual sine wave. It's not what we're looking for. Remember, geometrically, this pattern is something which is very, very clean, right? Here's an example on the Aussie, and again, you can see the kind of symmetry which is formed. So the price fell down. You can see that consolidation taking place, and here's our pin touch. Price broke higher into consolidation and collapsed. Here's the space under it. Here's the space over it. A very clean sine wave completion. And perhaps this morning we have another one going on here, right? So if we're looking at the construct, here's the space over it, here's the space under it, and as the price broke under, we can see this period of consolidation here, right? So it breaks up a little, consolidates under it, but you had that retest of the broken line, the price moved higher. There's your strike price, and as long as that strike price holds, you're looking at T1, and if it extends beyond T1, then you've got T2 at the origin of the wave. So our T2 would come in around 101.62, right? So you can see that long's been killed off, right? In anticipation of that. Okay, so Aussie giving a nice, quite clean example. We've got it kind of going both ways. Okay, here's another example, dollar Canadian, right? So it's a little bit messy here with the dollar Canadian, and it was more a case of is it, isn't it, is it, isn't it, right? Have I identified something right? Have I identified something wrong? So I'm going to show you the construct which I'm looking at, right? And it's a question of is it, isn't it, right? So ordinarily, I think what we've done is the earlier examples that we saw, we looked a lot at the second part of the wave, right? So this is a bullish example, but in those previous examples, we were looking at the second part of the wave mostly. Here, I want to look at the first part of the wave. Okay, and you can see how little space there is, right, between that and the mid pivot, and here we have quite a large space, right? So it looks like a sine wave, right? And we can see that there's a little bit of an overthrow on that line. Looks like a sine wave. Is it? Isn't it? I'm reserving judgment on this one because the markers aren't clear, right? But I wanted to put it on screen so that because we need to look at as many examples as possible. And the question that you need to be asking when you're seeing this particular construct is that, is there a trade there, right? That is the kind of all-important issue. Is there a trade there? Okay, and so is this something I would have traded? even though she went and hit the underside and she spiked through it and she did that. Is that something I would have traded as a sine wave? Probably not. All right. So if all I was doing was trading sine waves, would I trade that? Probably not. And okay, she's fallen down or whatever. If I was taking that, there may be 1,000 other reasons why I'd want to take it, but it wouldn't be on the back of sine wave completion, right? The geometry is not nice. The price symmetry is not very nice. It's not very appealing. And usually what you find is that the best patterns are very aesthetic, right? They're very pleasing. They're very pleasing to the eye, and this is just a mess, right? So we've got something that looks like it could be a sine wave, but because we haven't got that area as she hooks over, and although we have an area as she hooks under, here the first part of the move doesn't look to be like a very clean move, right? We want to see something which is arching. We want to see a nice clean area as she arches and she hooks over and she hooks under, and that is the first identifier that we use in order to determine the sine wave. Okay, pound Swissy, right? So beautifully clean sine wave here. This is one that we traded a few weeks back. It's the pound Swissy short. It's the pound Swissy short, and it was an exceptional trade because it went and hit both targets, right? But look at the beauty in the construct, right? So I don't want to start sounding all soft, right? Talking about beauty in that, but look at the beauty in that construct, right? It is just a very clean sweeping move, right? And you get that consolidation as it moves across, and then it moves under. You've got your sine wave completion, and we took the short. We rode it to T1, and I think some of us also had the fortune of riding it to T2, right? So I think probably the best example of what a sine wave should look like. Very clean construct. The price moves higher, consolidates sideways, moves higher again. So it's almost like a BCB, and she goes and completes at that level. And after that, I think it's almost like it's just obvious, right? That is a sine wave, and consequently, it was one of the ones that we traded, and it was very, very easy to be entering into that trade. Okay, so here's an example on Kiwi, right? And Kiwi, this was, if you remember the tail end of last week, we were looking short at Kiwi. She went and hit that sine wave, and that became cause to exit the trade. I actually took a long there and then closed out the long while it was consolidating around here for about 5 or 6 pips or something. So it wasn't very adventurous of me. But as far as the construct is concerned, it is a very, very clean construct here on the Kiwi. So we can see that the price made its way down, went into that sideways consolidation, and then broke down again. Here's our area under the line, here's our area above the line, and I mean, what you're looking at here is one of the things you'll notice is that the mid pivot line is being actually drawn through the price, right? Doesn't really matter, right? But what I was looking at was the actual, in fact, let me drop down a time frame on this, and it should become a little bit clearer. Okay, so you can see what I was looking at. All right, so I was seeing the trend line break, price arching over, hooking back, striking it, breaking higher, right? And so this is the first point the line was constructed from. This is the second point the line was constructed from, and you get a pip perfect completion on the next strike to that line, right? So if we're looking at the construct, there's our space under the price, there's our space over the price, but from a symmetry point of view, it was just very, very clean, right? It's about as clean as you're going to get. after looking at that pound Swissy chart, right? So if there's two which are going to end up in your pattern book, it would be this one, possibly the one on the Aussie, but definitely the one which we've taken the example from on the pound Swissy, right? And as well here you can see the general kind of construct. The price falls, you get almost like a flagging consolidation, and the price falls again. And as far as the mid pivot is concerned, you draw that through, you draw that using using a support that you find inside of that flag, and you end up with sine wave completion as she strikes the line. Okay, gold, right? Gold, fantastic. A couple of examples on gold, and I was a little bit. I'm a little bit excited about trading gold again after seeing these on the gold chart, but we do have a couple of examples here, and I like this because it's in a bullish. We've got a good example of a bullish one, but again, the price breaks up. She goes into a sideways consolidation, and in fact, if I just change the color, highlight is that, you can see that quite clearly. But she breaks up, she goes into sideways consolidation, she breaks higher, all right, and a very clean sine wave completion on gold, and then after that she just kind of accelerates to the downside, right? The reason that you're seeing boxes on the screen is that I've done some experimenting with this, and I was trying to work out that, is there a way of predicting the kind of target for a sine wave completion? So is it going to be an A, B, C, D, or is it going to be A, B, the CD leg is going to be 0.5%, or it's going to be 50% of the AB or something like this. I've wasted a lot of time drawing these boxes, and really it's nothing like that, right? All it is that you have your T1 and you have your T2, right? And T1, it reaches all of the time. T2, it reaches some of the time. Sometimes it will break through T2. Sometimes it will reverse from T2, right? So I don't think I'm in a position yet to be able to identify multi-wave moves as a result of having identified a sine wave completion. All we know is that that strike price is significant, and after that we have two targets, and after that what's going to happen is going to happen, right? But we're seeing a very nice construct here on gold, and then again, she does it on the way down, right? So if we're looking on the way down, here's price falling, she starts moving sideways, and then once she's done that, you're able to kind of construct that mid pivot line, which is very clean here. You can see the points which are being taken. You can see the points which are being taken in order to identify that, and she carries on moving down. We've got that space under the line. We've got that space above the line. She goes and completes around there, and you can see there's a little bit of an overthrow there, but that's okay. And after that, generally speaking, the level has held quite well, right? So it's reached T1 now on kind of several occasions. Is it going to reach T2? Right, big question, right? But as long as that T1 level holds, right, then it's kind of fair game, right? So is it going to reach T2? I guess we'll find out, right? And really, I'd say why not, right? If we're using the sine wave in order to develop a technical perspective and a bias, then why not? Okay. All right, we have a few more charts to look at, right? So we'll work through them, because I just want to give as many examples as possible. And actually, and you've got a question up, John. I'll take the question at the end. But if you guys have questions as we're going along, keep posting them, right? And we'll keep taking them. As we go along. Okay, so the pound a dollar. Right, so I want you to note a couple of things about the pound dollar, right? First off is that the line doesn't have to be taken from the high, right? So we don't have to take it from the high of the wave, right? You can take it from any high point, right? But what you look and the reason I've taken it from here is that it's the origin of the move, or it appears to be the origin of the move. So the price fell, she went into a consolidation, right? Almost looks like a flagging move, right? She fell again, and we had sine wave completion, right? So there's the space under the price, there's the space over the price, and she's reached T1, and then she's carried on and gone well beyond. She's gone well beyond T2. All right, so so again, quite a nice, clean kind of construct here that we're looking at, and I think again makes a very clean example of what a sine wave is and what a sine wave should look like, right? So just note that drop, note that kind of sideways consolidation move, and then the price drops again. It arches under, it arches over, and you have your sine wave completion. Okay, pound Canadian, right? So I'm looking at the pound Canadian because I was wondering, right? I was just kind of wondering, is there sine wave completion here or not, right? And I'm going to show you where I'm going to drop down a couple of time frames. All right, so his question is, if we're going to get sine wave completion here, where do I draw the line from, right? This was the kind of issue that I was trying to determine, right? And as far as, in fact, I probably need to drop another time frame. Right, so I was looking at this and I thought, this looks interesting. Where I'm going to be drawing this line from, right? And I've got this space over, and I've got this space under. I've got the space over and I've got the space under. Right now, for a sine wave completion, the price needs to go and hit the mid pivot. If it's not hitting the mid pivot, it's not sine wave, it's something else, right? And so I was trying to determine, okay, where do I draw it from? I need to have that retest, right? So I need to have that retest, and the only place where I'm seeing that retest is the price broke through that mid pivot. So okay, we can see that she's given some element of support. It broke under, went and retested, and then fell down, and now is breaking higher, right? So I would say if this was going to be a sine wave, then this is where the mid pivot would be, right? So would we have an entry on this? No, I guess not. We wouldn't, right? And is there an alternate place where it can be drawn, right? So could I draw it off the spike of this candle, right? Do you see it? Maybe I need to drop another time frame. Okay, this is how crazy my hunt for sine wave completions is getting. All right, so so would it be on that candle, right? So we can see. You have to look quite closely at this, and as like I said, I'm spending a lot of time just kind of examining the nuances, right? But is it on this candle, right? And so we still have our space under, we have our space over, but that is something very, very important to identify, right? That you're looking for that spike back, right? And once you've got that spike back, you've got potentially your sine wave completion. And so at pound CAD, you'd be looking for that high to hold, as long as the high is holding, then you would say that the formation is intact, and if the price were to break above that level, you would say that the formation is no longer intact, right? So looking at the chart, I guess it's a question of when you identified it, all right, more than anything else. And if this is going to be sine wave completion, she has to reach T1, right, which would have her pushing back towards the 58 price area at least, right? That is that is what you've got to be looking for if you're looking at GBP CAD as a sine wave completion. So not the easiest, most cleanly or clearly identifiable mid pivot point here. It did seem to make more sense there, right? Which would say no, right? But you know what? I'm prepared to play with these kinds of things, right? And when you play with it, that's when you kind of recognize the nuances. And for me, it becomes a question of saying, you stopped here, why? Right? And is that something that I could have known in advance that this is where you're going to stop? Right? So so that is something which is uh, uh, in essence, it's the point, right? You know, that's the point, right? That if you stop, why did you have to stop here at this particular point, right? Why were you shy of my retest of the underside of a broken trend line, right? Why are you shy of that? And is this something that I could repeat in future, right? And use that spike candle in order to draw this, right? So I'm looking at sine wave completion on pound CAD, and T1 target is the 58 area. The price is 58.82. You're looking at a 20 pip risk, 30 pip risk, right? And in fact, even if the price breaks above that level, then she breaks back under it. You become a player, and you say, okay, it was a false break, and you're breaking back under. I'm going to start targeting the downside again, right? So it gives you an opportunity to play, and all we're looking for is that opportunity, but at a risk-defined level, right? So this having been identified since yesterday, how many opportunities to play, right? The level's holding, and as long as the level holds, technically you'd say that the formation is intact, and it's only when the price breaks above that level, which she's trying to embarrass me right now, you'd say that the structure has fallen apart, we've got a failure, and we're not going to get that sine wave completion, right? So like I said, as far as bias is concerned, I would hold the bias until I have reason to do otherwise, right? I would maintain that bias, and there would be no reason to change it. You just play the level until the level breaks. Okay, GBP JPY, right? So GBP JPY is an interesting one, right? It's an interesting one because I'm applying some reverse psychology on GBP JPY. Actually, on GBP JPY, I'd like to see her fall down, right? And I'd like to see her back in the kind of 119 area. I'm just really surprised she hasn't gone and retested that NFP area. But what I'm thinking is that, is there a sine wave forming here, right? So we've had our break higher, right? And is this the area, or is this the area, right? And so would she end up doing something like that, right? And giving sine wave completion. So again, it's something I'm playing with at the moment, and trying to work out that can you predict it. But as far as the trading bias is concerned, the trade is actually about the completion, right? Because that's where we get our risk definition, right? So, but here I'm just trying to work out, is it, will it be, won't it be? It's just way too easy. It's just way too early to say. And I think really, the sine wave is more easily identified once it's near its point of completion, rather than when it's in that sideways consolidation and being formed. When it's in that sideways consolidation and being formed, if you're good with flags and things like that, you may get that break north. And if you're getting that break north, you know exactly where you want to be exiting that trade, right? You want to be exiting at the completion, and then you want to be looking for a then you want to be looking for a reversal from that level. So GBP JPY is just something I'm playing with. Way too early to say, but it's a case of, okay, can we predict this? If we can predict it, how effectively can we do that, right? And to know that there is going to be to know that there's a sine wave and sine wave completion, and maybe that would give us some opportunities to chase the completion as a target if we're able to define risk using whatever other technique that we decide to use. Okay, looking at the Euro GBP, looking here at a H4 time frame, and this is actually quite big, right? I mean, that wave down is to the tune of about 400 odd pips, which 400 pips on Euro GBP is like 50,000 pips on any other pair. All right, but potentially, are we getting sine wave completion here, right? That's the question which I'm asking. And she's gone and struck the line, and so I guess what I would be doing is to be saying, okay, you know what, we've got this area under the price. I like the fact that it's quite a clean mid pivot in the sense that it wasn't retested, right, as the price was under it. So we didn't have that thing where the price is coming and retesting it like this or something and actually hitting that hitting the level. She stayed under it, right? And here we have the price breaking through. We have a retest here, so I'm using that as 0.1 and I'm using this as 0.2, and I've constructed my line. We had a little breach, a little bit of an overthrow, but I am asking the question, that is this the end for now as far as the Euro GBP bear rally is concerned, and perhaps we can start looking for a move back up towards mid pivot, which would have us looking towards the 79.80 or up towards the 80 area, and at that point we'd have to kind of reassess and say, okay, is support being established enough so that we can look towards T2, right, and which has us pushing back towards 84.85, and but certainly there may well be a case for a trade here, right? It's just a very large time frame, right, to be looking at, but interesting nevertheless, right? Interesting nevertheless, and just liking the idea that she's rallied from there, right? So she hit the level and she rallied. So as I suppose as she's coming in close to that 78.30 area, to be looking for a defense of 78 on Euro GBP, it may not be such a bad idea, right? It may not be such a bad idea, right? So so on the H4, potential here for a sine wave completion on the Euro GBP. Looks like a fairly clean construct, right? Looks like a fairly clean construct. The price fell. We've got an area under it. We've got an area over it, and it's being retested, which would have us interested. In particular, on this pair, it's going to be worth an attempt or two, mostly because the target is so significant, right? Just look at that target, right? It's your first target is to the tune of about 140 odd pips, all right? And like I said, with Euro GBP, because of its kind of standard ATR, it doesn't always require risking that much or taking on a very, very significant risk in order to trade it. Okay, last one up, and then we'll start looking at some of the questions. Is the Euro AUD, and here I'm looking at the Euro AUD on the daily, and again, it's just a lot of questions that I have, but I'm liking the general construct, right? And so a lot of space under the mid pivot, a lot of space over the mid pivot, and so then the issue is, how much further down does she have to go, right? And I wouldn't be entirely surprised if she went and completed at that sine wave, and so what, we could be looking even at the 16 area or something like that, and after that would be looking for a rally back to the 22 area. All right, so if this is going to be a sine wave completion, you'd want to go and see it hit the price. You'd want to see that level holding, and once that level is holding, you can be quite assured of quite a large move, right? So in this instance, for the price to reach its T1, you could potentially be looking at 400-500 pips, right? So here it's something which is being marked on a daily chart. Just kind of bear that in mind, right? So if it's going to do those 500 pips, hopefully it does it in one day, right? But that may not necessarily be the case. However, if you see that wave, if you see that sine wave completion taking place, and you've got your confirmation on the daily, it could make for a very, very good trade, right? So you can see what the construct is. You can see what the structure is. Okay, as far as the percentage of the patterns working, I've taken now actually several trades on the sine wave completion, and pretty much everyone that I took worked out, right? So and there are some which I've seen, but I didn't trade, and those worked out as well, right? So but I'd say we're still in kind of early stages here, right? And it is about identifying the construct and identifying the clean construct. So one of the reasons why I've taken so many examples, you can see we've got almost 10 examples or something, is that it's a case of just becoming aware that there's a geometry here, there's a symmetry here which is at play, and it's something which is very, very visual, right? So if we're looking at the one on USD JPY, you can see the symmetry, right? And it's that symmetry that does it for me more than anything else. If we're looking at the dollar Swiss, you can see the lack of symmetry, right, in that sine wave, and that would have me sitting back and saying, okay, I don't want to attempt a sine wave completion here for that particular reason, that there's a lack of symmetry here. On the Aussie, again, you can see in that move down, there's pretty good symmetry. We can see in the sine wave that we've constructed here going up that there's pretty good symmetry, and we've got some fairly decent, reasonable markers here on screen, right? So I like the symmetry there, and where I have symmetry, I'm prepared to play. Where the aesthetic is not clean or clear or good, that's where I like to kind of sit back and say, you know what, I'd just rather watch this and see how it plays out, and then maybe in the future, if I see it happening in exactly the same way, I'll know what the expectation is. I'll know what the expectation is going to be. There's our dollar Canadian. It had poor symmetry. We had an overthrow. You had the consolidation at the level, and nevertheless, the trade worked out. Although I wouldn't readily identify this as being sine wave completion, because I'm not happy with the first part of that formation, right? So the underside looks like a very clean curving sine wave structure, but the first part didn't. The pound Swissy, this is a trade that many of us in the trading room participated in, down to the T1 at least, and some of us caught it to the T2. But again, what you're looking at is excellent symmetry, and I think it's that symmetry that defines it defines how well this pattern is going to work or not, right? It's the symmetry that defines it more than anything else. If we're looking at the Kiwi, we had some excellent symmetry there, right? We had some excellent symmetry there, and again, you can see, it made for a very, very nice trade north, and we've been able to catch some of the latter part of that, which kind of has me thinking that she's going to make it to T2 after consolidating in the same block. after consolidating in the same block for a while. Looking at gold, again, very nice symmetry, and where we had the symmetry, the trade worked out very well. Pound dollar, it was all about the symmetry. Pound Canadian, we've got some very nice symmetry here, and in fact, uh, we can see how well that level is holding, right? So it is the case, as long as the level holds, the the bias remains intact. GBP JPY, I think there's just some forethoughts there, but Euro GBP, there's some symmetry here. It's not the best symmetry, right? A little bit elongated here, right? But it does look like we've got our sine wave completion, right? So so this is something I would be prepared to play. I just want to see the level holding, and I'd say, okay, you know what? Why not play it similar to the pound CAD? Euro AED. Euro AED seems to be displaying symmetry, right? Looks very clean, under and over, right? So I would be very excited about getting some completion on the Euro AED, right? And seeing that go and hit strike price. So as far as percentage working and not working, I mean, as far as I've been able to see, I've identified ones which look clean, and the ones that look clean from a geometrical and symmetrical point of view, I think that, and I mean, it appears that they work, right? I've found ones which, and where we haven't got that clean geometric structure, in that instance, it's not a sine wave. It is in fact something else, right? So we were looking here, for example, at USD JPY, right? And I'm just going to give you kind of example here. So if I drew a line, just kind of taking the high of that, right, and said, look, I've got support resistance, I've got a wall, broken trend line, retest, retest, right? This is something else. It's not sine wave, right? But if it were going to be sine wave, I'm prepared to play and manipulate the line and say, okay, I've got this hook here, so here's the underside, here's the overside, and if geometrically it looks clean, if she goes and strikes the price and you see the level holding, you can start getting interested in taking a trade, right? And the other point which I want to mention about it is that from a risk-reward perspective, I think that it's an excellent structure to be trading, right? So it doesn't require you to be risking a heck of a lot in order to be getting in on a trade on this, right? It literally requires a handful of pips, and you've got a very considered target to be chasing for that trade, right? So so that's something else to take into consideration. A third point that I would add is that it's always good to collect pattern failure, right? So if you're charting this and you find something looks like a sine wave and it wasn't, right, and it didn't go to that T1, right, then you need to start collecting that, right, and working out and saying, okay, are there nuances here? Is there something that we could do to identify when this pattern doesn't complete, or when this structure doesn't complete? All right, but I've been studying this now for the best part of 2 months, and I've put a lot of effort working backwards and working forwards in terms of trying to identify this structure, and it just seems very, very tradable, right? It just seems very, very tradable. Okay, we'll try using the zigzag for starts and completions. So you're talking about the zigzag indicator, Ayman? Um, okay, I'm not sure what you would mean by I'm not sure what you would mean by completion, right? So uh, I mean I've applied the zigzag on here, but how you would use the zigzag for completion? I'm not sure. I'll take a look at right, but like I said, it's something which it's something which is visual, right? So so the basic construct which I pointed out, and the cleanest construct seems to be when the price drops and consolidates and then drops again, right? Or if you're going the other way, she rises, she goes into this kind of consolidation, and then she rises again, and you're drawing your mid pivot about halfway or just past halfway through that consolidation, and that's where you tend to get your sine wave completion, right? So um, but I don't mind playing with this kind of stuff if you find a way of making it easier to identify point two. So point one is quite easy. It's either going to, it's going to be pretty much the origin of the move. That's where point one is going to be. And it may be worth, I suppose, one of the things that you can do is um, to look for some confluence with another trend line and say, okay, you know what, if it goes and completes at this point, I've got my sine wave and I've got something else, and that would probably allow you to be a little bit more aggressive with it. So in this sense, I don't know if I'd take those lows, or I'd be looking for something, right, and saying, okay, does she go and complete at this point or that point or whatever, right? It is possible. It is possible in order to do that. Um, okay, let's have a look. So, okay, John, I'm confused now. Which trend line 1, 2, 3 touch and retest now? Sine wave. I'm missing point of what is a sine wave? Is it all down to the consolidation, the cross of the trend line? Yes, it is. Right. So um, uh, the uh, the sine wave is just a glorified S. Okay, and what you do is you rotate that by 45 degrees. Right, so just rotate that image by 45 degrees. That's what a sine wave looks like, right? So uh, it's and that's how we're identifying it. The issue of first touch, second touch, third touch, that's something else, right? So usually you get that on a broken trend line, right? And my point here is that a sine wave is something which is quite specific. What's important with the sine wave as far as constructing is concerned, so you have your point one, but what's really important is where you identify point two to be. Okay. The next element which I would add, and again this is something which I suppose you'd recognize, is that once you've had that strike at the sine wave completion, really you're looking at that as a level, right? You're looking at it as a level, and you're saying, okay, I want to see this level holding, and as long as this level is holding, I'm prepared to entertain trades, right? That's what you're saying, right? And that is the whole kind of that is the whole kind of point of it. So it doesn't have to be an aggressive entry, right? I guess, right? It can be a conservative entry. As long as you're seeing the level is holding, then you can be prepared to play the level, and as long as the level holds, you will keep your trade very much intact. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look. Darren's yes, okay. So all right. So Euro USD looks like a sine wave, right? And certainly was good for a bounce, right? Right. So so that's okay. We'll keep a very close eye on this one, right? Is it a false break? Is she going to break higher, right? It's constructed on, that looks like it's constructed on the daily time frame, right? So yeah, I think it'll be worth keeping an eye on that. Okay, thought the WMD method was keep it simple. Seems suggestible. Yeah, it is about keeping it simple, right? But you know what? I'm sharing a technique here, right? And I've been having lots of joy with this technique. Recently, what it comes down to is that we have several techniques that we use in order to determine bias and trade. And what you've got to do is just use the one which is the most straightforward for you to work with, right? So you don't have to be a master of every single technique, and you don't have to use every single technique. Um, uh, I like trendline techniques in particular, right? I like them because, and I've mentioned this before, most often they do suggest wave completion, and quite often you'll see if there is going to be wave completion, it completes at a trend line, right? So I like trendline techniques a lot, and it's a case of trying to apply it. And if you find that you've got an eye for it, and that these structures are easy for you to identify, then you use it, right? If not, then stick with the hourly technique, stick with the BCBs and the other techniques that we've mentioned. It's a case of becoming good with one particular technique. And so here I'm just kind of showing something that works. I've taken several trades now over the course of the last few weeks using this particular technique, and I'm finding I have quite a good eye for it, right? So and as well, I think as far as trendline techniques are concerned, right, this is probably one of the easiest, I reckon, right, in terms of visually what we're looking for. It's just that symmetry: under, over, wave completion, finished, right? That's all there is. That's all there is to it, literally, right? So I think it's one of the easier techniques, fella. Okay, wave completion tends to end a trend line. That is a very interesting thought. It does, right? It just does. From my experience, anyway, right? So I think any time if you look at where a wave has completed, you can find that there's some trend line or another involved, right? That seems to be pretty much always the case. But okay, fellas, that's it. That's it. Thanks very much for attending. I hope you